My best friend of 20 years destroyed my marriage by sleeping with my husband of 12 years, getting pregnant, and destroying my family. My husband, Tyler, and I have been together since I was 21 and he was 23. We shared nearly 2 years of dating bliss before he finally popped the question. We've been married for the past 12 years, raising our 2 kids together. During our second year of dating, Tyler introduced me to his mother, Ashley. From the very first meeting, I tried my best to make a good impression, but the feeling wasn't mutual. Ashley had been a widow for years after her husband passed away from a heart attack. Raising Tyler, they share a bond so close it almost feels like he's her lifeline. Tyler, being a bit of a mama's boy, was always nervous about my meeting her. He desperately wanted her approval in everything he did. The main reason Ashley never liked me was because of my background. I come from an upper-middle-class family with parents who owned multiple businesses. Growing up, I enjoyed a comfortable life, with my parents covering my college expenses and buying me my first car to help me get to work on time. They instilled the value of independence and self-sufficiency in me, so I've always worked hard to support myself, never asking for financial help after graduation. Tyler's life was quite different. His father was in the military, so he was rarely around, and after his father's passing, he and Ashley became inseparable. Ashley struggled with alcoholism, so from a young age, Tyler had to take care of her. He started working at McDonald's during high school to earn extra money. When he was in college, he dropped out because he didn't feel passionate about his communications degree anymore. Tyler told me how miserable he was during this time, finding it very challenging to land a job without a degree. He eventually started looking for easier work that didn't require a diploma, eventually becoming a freelance writer. To my surprise, he thrived in this role, traveling as a digital nomad for a few years before finally settling down and meeting me. Throughout all this, Ashley would ask Tyler to send her a monthly allowance, which he would willingly provide despite the strain it placed on his finances. When our relationship started becoming more serious, I finally felt compelled to tell Tyler about my family and our generational wealth. He didn't believe me initially, but was shocked when he Googled my family. Tyler got angry with me, accusing me of not trusting it. I tried to explain that many people in my past were only interested in me because of my family, which is why I learned to wait before revealing my generational wealth. He understood eventually. But there were times he would tease me about how I never had to work so hard or how I would never know the feeling of struggling. This deeply offended me because despite my parents' support, I had worked diligently to establish myself I loved managing influencers and brands. And that was how I funded my entire lifestyle without needing my parents' help. Tyler never fully understood this, and that should have been my first red flag. When we decided to move in together, Tyler was quick to suggest moving into my place since I had the bigger apartment. I agreed, but when it came to discussing how we would split the rent, Tyler didn't like the idea. Started telling me that he earned so little as a freelance writer and that, because I come from old money, I should prove my love for him by helping him out. He saw this as me needing to pay for his share of the bills as well as the rent. I told him that, although I didn't think this was fair, I could let him go for the rent, but he had to pay his own bills. This made Tyler raise his voice at me, going on a rant about how I was selfish and that if I didn't agree to pay his bills, it would show how cruel I was. We argued back and forth, and I finally caved in. I had to cut back on a lot to pay for all our bills, but I was madly in love with him. Tyler would continue sending his mother monthly allowances and purchasing extravagant gifts, a habit that never failed to irk me. Whenever I would gently point out how he had the means to send money to his mother but couldn't manage to cover our bills, he would flare up. Her needs are greater. He'd argue she's a single parent, after all. Each time he said that, I felt a pang of guilt, and eventually, I just stopped bringing it up altogether. When Tyler finally proposed, I was over the moon. Looking back, though, he seemed to put the bare minimum effort into it. I'd hoped he might go all out for the big moment, but it turned out he thought proposing to me in our backyard was a brilliant idea. To his credit, he did ask my parents for my hand like a gentleman, but even my mother suggested he seek help from my best friend, Anthony, to plan a more memorable proposal. Tyler agreed, and they concocted this genius idea. Face palm of proposing to me right in my own backyard in front of our entire family and friends. Anthony had been my best friend since high school. Her family is like my own and mine to hers too. Our moms grew up together since childhood, so it's no surprise we became fast friends. She was more like a sister to me than just a friend, my soulmate in so many ways. We'd done everything together, and her mom adored me like her own daughter just as much as my mom loved Anthony like hers. When Tyler and I started dating, I introduced him to Anthony, and they became fast friends too. Anthony not only helped Tyler plan the proposal but also choose my engagement ring. To be honest, I was taken aback by the surprise proposal, but seeing all my family gathered there to celebrate my special day with me made me feel much better, even though I was a bit disappointed by the setting, being proposed to in my backyard. It was a happy night for all of us. My mom, Anthony, and Anthony's mother were the first to hug me and congratulate me. Tyler's mother, Mallory, was equally happy for us and mentioned how she had high expectations for me as a daughter-in-law, hoping I'd do everything in my power to keep her son happy. It was a happy night for all of us. Eventually, Tyler and I did get married. Even after marriage, I continued to foot the bill for everything around the house. While he didn't spend a penny on me, I kept paying for our weekly dates and yearly vacations because Tyler insisted he was saving up money for our future. When I got pregnant with James, our first child, I was forced to quit my job due to a difficult pregnancy. Tyler didn't like that one bit when he found out and started arguing with me about how I needed to work if we were to sustain ourselves with a child. That broke me emotionally, and that's when I finally opened up to my parents about our situation. My mom sympathized with Tyler instead of with me, telling me how there were hundreds of mothers who managed to work while pregnant. On the other hand, my dad was furious. He called Tyler to give him a piece of his mind, telling him firmly that it was time for him to step up as a man for his family. He warned Tyler that if he continued to behave this way with me, then he would not let his daughter go through this suffering. He made it clear that a divorce might be better for us. Hearing my dad mention divorce made Tyler quite nervous. Although I never wanted a divorce, Tyler and I had signed a prenup before our marriage at the insistence of my father. It meant he knew I would no longer be there to fund his extravagant lifestyle, and he would lose this house and his expensive car, all of which were under my name. Tyler made the bold decision to stop sending any allowance to his mother and assumed responsibility for all household bills. I continued to cover the rent, thanks to my ample saving. His abrupt halt in providing for his mother sparked a simmering resentment. She had grown accustomed to his financial support, and his sudden withdrawal cast me as the villain in her eyes. When I first brought our son James into the world, I felt a rush of joy. Friends and family flocked to the hospital to celebrate our new arrival. Anthony stayed with me, providing much-needed comfort during those early days, while Tyler, consumed by work, failed to step up in any meaningful way. Back at home, adjusting to the demands of motherhood made me anxious. My parents and Anthony's mother were always there, offering a helping hand. But Ashley, Tyler's mother, was indifferent. She never lent a hand when visiting James, only criticizing me for trivial matters, like my weight or how I managed the baby's needs. Her unwelcome remarks were always pointedly directed at me, while Tyler did nothing to help. I felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion and loneliness, circumstances exacerbated by postpartum depression at P, a silent struggle many mothers face but seldom discuss. Despite my best efforts to share the responsibilities and communicate my needs, Tyler remained distant. He told me that parenting was solely my responsibility and that he had no clue how to care for our child. Each day, his refusal to help deepened my despair. He wouldn't even change a single diaper or help with feeding James. The weight of my responsibilities grew heavier with each passing day, intensifying the suffocating grip of PBD. Every attempt to reach out for support felt like I was drowning in a sea of unmet expectations. It was a pivotal moment when I decided to open up to my parents about my mental health struggles. While my father was understanding, my mother dismissed my condition. She claimed that PPD wasn't real and that I should be strong for our baby's sake. When I confided in her about Tyler's lack of support, she scolded me, insisting that Tyler was the father and I should simply do better as a mother. Her lack of empathy only compounded my sense of isolation. Amidst this, Anthony remained my steadfast support. I poured my heart out to her about my failing marriage, and she listened, offering sympathy and understanding. She frequently voiced her disdain for Tyler's antics, how he was a poor excuse for a husband and parent. It was a relief to have Anthony's support, alongside my father's, during such a challenging time. A year later, to my astonishment, I discovered I was pregnant again. This was an accident, considering I definitely didn't want another child so soon. Yet, I decided to trust in God's plan. Tyler was furious, to say the least. He insisted I needed to abort the pregnancy as soon as possible since we couldn't afford another baby. This sparked intense arguments, and eventually, I decided it was time for me to return to work. I contacted my old boss, who was thrilled to have me back as a freelancer until a more permanent position would open. Though my second pregnancy was equally challenging, I was more determined this time, fueled by my newfound responsibility as a parent. When I went back to work, I made a bold move. I stopped depositing my entire paycheck into our joint savings account. I wanted to think ahead and be prepared for both my future and my kids' welfare. So, I started keeping 50 of my paycheck, with only the remaining 50 going into our joint account. As soon as I started earning money, Tyler became lazier by the day. He began complaining daily about how much he hated his job and how he wanted to quit. I tried to talk him out of it, reminding him that without a college degree, he needed to stick with this well-paying job. This would set him off, especially since he hated being reminded that he was a college dropout. Tyler would tell me how I had taken a break, so he deserved to do the same. I countered, pointing out that I never took a break. I was struggling while forming another human being inside me. Despite our arguments, Tyler decided to quit his job, saying we had enough savings and that now that I was earning money, he could afford to take a break. He then spent his entire day playing video games while I juggled household chores, looked after the baby, and continued working at my job. I'd leave James with my parents whenever I went to work since my mother didn't mind watching him. When I returned home after picking up James from my mother's, I would see Tyler sitting in the same spot on our sofa, glued to his video games. This routine continued for a while, and I started growing tired of being the sole parent. In a fit of anger, I confronted him about how he needed to start looking for a new job. Tyler didn't take it well, which is why he started spending every day at his friend's place, where they would both play video games. His friend, Clinton, was a middle-aged divorcee whose wife had cheated on and left him. This made Clinton resentful of every woman, which I didn't like either. Tyler started spending more and more time at his friends, and our arguments increased. I was growing tired of being a single parent, since Tyler literally contributed nothing. But I held on for the sake of my children. When I gave birth to Nan, our second child, Tyler was so busy, he didn't bother checking my multiple calls and messages when I went into labor. This meant he missed it entirely. I never once suspected him. Despite the glaring red flags, Anthony was also missing when I called her for help. In the end, my parents had to take me to the emergency room. She showed up the next day to visit me and the baby, telling me how sorry she was for not being there for me since she was stuck at work, which was quite all right with me. After Nan was born, I finally put my foot down and told Tyler this was his last chance. If he didn't go back to work, then I was going to pack my things and leave. This resulted in a huge fight between us, but I didn't care anymore. I knew that as my children's mother, I needed to be with someone who could be equally responsible. I told him I would never hold anything against him and that he was free to walk away. But Tyler told me he would start looking for a job the next day. This was unexpected, considering I expected him to resist or start arguing with me. It was a moment of twisted fate. To my utter surprise, he agreed to work things out. But the next day, while he was in the shower, and I was gathering his dirty clothes for laundry, I heard a ping on his phone. My heart froze as my eyes widened, catching a glimpse of a message on his lock screen from a familiar number. My breath hitched as I stared at the words. Will you be telling her about us? I'm pregnant and can't hold off the news any longer. I was paralyzed, rereading the message over and over, unable to process the gut-wrenching revelation. When my husband emerged from the bathroom, he saw me frozen in place, holding his phone. He rushed to snatch it from my hands, but it was too late. The laundry basket slipped from my grip as I stepped towards him and slapped him as hard as I could. I acted without thinking, my body trembling with a fury that felt otherworldly. His eyes widened in shock as he tried to piece everything together, stammering about how it was all just a big misunderstanding. I looked him squarely in the eye and spat out words I never thought I'd say. You are dead to me. With that, I packed my bags and grabbed the kids, driving them straight to my parents' place. The sight of me standing there with my children and bags in tow left my parents stunned. I broke down, pouring out everything I'd kept bottled up for so long. I'd been crying nonstop for days, utterly lost in disbelief. I spilled the truth to my boss, who graciously allowed me a few days off. Work felt like a welcome distraction during this dark period. A flood of supportive messages poured in from Reddit, and I've been dealing with it all alone. My best friend of 20 years decided to betray me by sleeping with my husband of 12 years. Not only that, she's now pregnant, meaning Tyler and my marriage are pretty much over. Tyler and Anthony have been bombarding me with calls and messages, urging me to at least hear them out. But I refuse. Tyler is begging me not to divorce him, pleading for me to think about our children. Thank you all for your messages and comments on my post. I know it's been a month since I left you hanging without an update, but a lot has been happening in my life. I'm back at work now. No matter what happens, I can't just drop everything for so long. Work provides a welcome distraction, especially during this time. A lot of you suspected right about Tyler and Anthony's betrayal for a long time. Anthony sent me a heartfelt message, admitting that she hadn't meant for it to happen, but she has apparently fallen in love with Tyler. Now that she's going to be a mother, she has to think about herself first. That's why she'd been pushing Tyler to tell me the truth. Tyler, on the other hand, knew he'd lose access to an extravagant lifestyle if he lost me. He admitted he made a mistake. He only wanted to sleep with Anthony, but now she's pregnant. He's cornered. He's been begging for forgiveness, even suggesting we could convince Anthony to give up her baby and raise it together. His delusions and entitlement only fuel my anger further. As for how they got together, it turns out Tyler had been confiding in Anthony for a while behind my back. While he was out playing video games all day, he poured out his mental distress about our marriage. Anthony was there to listen, and instead of telling him how wrong this was, Clinton, his best friend, encouraged him to meet up with Anthony. He said she was clearly more of a woman than me. That's how Anthony and he met up one day, just to talk, and the two-faced woman decided to sleep with my husband. I still find myself perplexed by her motives, even though she was well aware of just how toxic Tyler was to me. At this point, I truly don't care anymore. Anthony's messages suggested I should be grateful she was taking him off my hands since I had always wanted to leave but lacked the courage. Maybe this was her plan all along, but who knows? Frankly, I'm just relieved that she decided to take out the trash. Now, she can live her life regretting ever meeting a man like Tyler. I'm also certain that on the day I went into labor, they must have been together because neither of them answered my calls for help. But this isn't even the worst part. When I first confided in my parents about Tyler and Anthony, my mother refused to believe me, while my father called Tyler and gave him a good verbal lashing for a solid 15 minutes. Even when I was crying, my mother tried to downplay it, suggesting there was no way Anthony would betray me like this. I called up Anthony's mother to tell her everything, and unlike my own mother, she was enraged. She didn't question me for a second and was completely on my side, knowing full well I would never fabricate such a thing. She kept repeating how sorry she was and cried with me for a while, truly understanding the depth of betrayal I was feeling at that moment. After talking with my father, I've made the decision to file for divorce. We already have a lawyer in mind, and with Tyler's betrayal, this divorce proceeding should be straightforward. The tricky part might come with custody arrangements for my children, but I'm confident Tyler will never want any responsibility for them. I know I'll get full custody. Yet, throughout all this, my mother has been vehemently against my decision to divorce. When she realized that no matter how much she pleaded with me not to get a divorce, I wasn't going to listen, she seemed to change her tactics suddenly. She started suggesting I should consider giving up full custody of my children to Tyler. This took me by surprise when she first brought it up, but I thought she was joking. When she continued pushing this for the last few days, I finally lost my temper today and started shouting at her about how dare she suggest something like this to me. But she didn't say anything, just walked out of the room. Her behavior has begun to make me feel extremely suspicious. Why would my own mother ask me to give up custody of my children when she knows Tyler is not a capable parent? I feel like I need to sit down and confront her in front of my dad to find out exactly what she has in mind. It's only been a few days since my last update, but my DMs are flooded with people coming up with their own theories. I know for some of you this might seem like an entertaining story, but for me, this is the reality of my life. My lawyer has served divorce papers to Tyler, and he called me crying like a child, begging me to forgive him. But I just laughed at his misery and told him to get ready to lose everything. James and I are doing well despite this family turmoil. Tyler never spent much time with them, so they hardly notice he's missing. Taking care of a baby while going through all this has been extremely difficult, but I'm glad to have my dad's support. Anthony's mother also came to visit me since she lives in another city. She hasn't bothered to even talk or listen to Anthony, and has made it clear how she plans to cut her off, as this is an embarrassing situation not just for my family, but also for hers. She's ashamed of her own daughter. She also knows how deadbeat a father Tyler has been, so she's certain Anthony will eventually be contacting her for financial assistance, which she is firmly against. The news of my divorce due to Anthony's backstabbing has spread to my friend group as well as my relatives, and everyone's on my side. People aren't that forgiving, so they started sending foul messages to both Anthony and Tyler, abusing both of them. This is when Ashley finally gave me a call. Throughout the last month, she didn't have a single ounce of decency to call me for comfort or to apologize. I'm sure she knew about all this and was probably ashamed that her picture-perfect son messed up his great life and knocked up another girl. She called to tell me how Tyler was suffering so much since everyone in his family had also found out about his indiscretions and was pissed at him. I remained silent as she unabashedly prattled on about how, as a dutiful daughter-in-law, I should return to Tyler and retract the divorce proceedings. She tried to justify her son's vile actions by claiming that men occasionally veer off course, but it was our duty as women to steer them back. I couldn't bear her nonsense any longer, so I snapped, demanding she shut up. She was taken aback by the sudden rise in my voice, since I had always been good and respectful to her. I told her she should be ashamed of giving birth to such a worthless man like Tyler, a mere leech, and if she ever dared to call me again, I'd make sure to drain every single penny from him during our divorce. I reminded her that I had taken care of her man-child our entire marriage, so she had no right to ask me for anything now that he had knocked up my best friend. Mallory tried to apologize as a last-ditch effort to protect her son, but I warned her that I'd take legal action against her if she ever called again. It felt good to finally stand up to her and show her that I was no longer that timid daughter-in-law she had met. Tyler was going to get exactly what was coming for him, and no one would be able to protect him. I also sat down to talk with my parents yesterday regarding my mother's suspicious behavior. I had already given a heads up to my dad about how she had been pressuring me to give up full custody of my children, so he was prepared to grill the truth out of her. I confronted my mother straightforwardly, demanding to know why she had been insisting I give Tyler full custody of my children even though it was never going to happen. My mother hesitated at first, but my dad kept grilling her. And finally, she broke. To our shock, my mother confessed that after I had exposed Anthony and my husband sleeping together, she decided to confront Anthony because she didn't believe me. They met up, and Anthony started begging her for forgiveness. My mother couldn't believe that Anthony had really done something like this, but then Anthony revealed she was pregnant and needed Tyler to raise her child. Instead of screaming at her, my mother apparently felt sorry for her. She promised to help her out financially, and tried to convince her not to break up mine and Tyler's marriage, saying how Tyler could continue to support her child even if he was married to me. Anthony didn't want that, so my mother changed her tactics and started telling Anthony that if she was responsible for breaking up our marriage, she should also be responsible for raising the kids as well. Anthony was shocked at first to hear this, but my mother told her I suffered from PDD, so I wasn't a capable mother. The least Anthony could do was raise Tyler's children all together as a family since they would all be siblings anyway. She even went as far as to convince Anthony that if I gave up full custody of my children, I'd be required to pay a hefty child support, which Anthony could use to take care of her child. This convinced Anthony, which is why my mother had been pressuring me to give up custody of James and Nina. When my dad and I grilled this information out of her, we were disgusted, to say the least. I couldn't believe that I was facing yet another betrayal in my life, my own mother thought, because of my PPD. I was incapable enough to raise my own children, and she would rather have Anthony raise them than me. It shocked me that my mother failed to see how I fell into PPD in the first place because Tyler refused to help me in any way. How I used to beg him to be an equal parent while he would feign ignorance. How I would single-handedly take care of everything while he looked for an excuse to shirk responsibility in any way. I started to cry since I didn't know how she could betray me like this after my husband and best friend did the same thing. My dad, who had been quiet for a while, finally asked my mother to simply get out of the house. My mother started crying as they kept arguing, but my dad told her that their marriage was over. He didn't want to see her face anymore. I don't remember much, but eventually my mother left to stay at her sister's place. I honestly don't know what to do. It feels like I can't trust anyone anymore. Everyone seems to betray me like I mean nothing to them. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I know it's been a long time. Thank you again. Seriously. Your comments, your support, your messages. All of it has been one giant breath of fresh air. Just knowing I have a whole online community willing to go to bat for me has kept me treading water these last couple of months. Your comments have popped up in my notifications when I felt like just giving up on my life. When life threw its toughest punches, they were the ones that kept me moving forward. First things first, I finalized my divorce last month. My dad, who's been my rock throughout, kept me steady. We pushed forward with the divorce proceedings, and as expected, Tyler didn't get a penny from me thanks to my prenup agreement. When it came time for the custody of our children, he fought tooth and nail for full custody at first, but when that didn't pan out, he tried for equal custody. My lawyer laid bare how he had been a deadbeat father throughout our marriage. No proper job, his mother an alcoholic, and even cheating on me, getting another woman pregnant. That argument cost Tyler dearly, and I was granted full custody of our children, with Tyler paying a monthly child support check. Nothing felt sweeter than watching his face drain of sadness and defeat. I looked back to see Ashley glaring at me, and I smirked, just as I had promised. I got what I wished for. Secondly, coming on to my mother, she begged and begged for forgiveness. My dad firmly refused to let her off the hook so easily, insisting she go to therapy to address her internalized misogyny, so she could truly grasp just how wrong she was to treat me this way when I was so vulnerable. I know my parents love each other, and it breaks my heart to see them apart, but I understand why my dad insists on talking to a therapist. To her credit, my mother has been faithfully going to therapy while staying with her sister. I don't know if it will help her in any meaningful way, but I hope she does change. Although I've blocked Anthony, I'm still in touch with her mother. Anthony's mother, just as she promised me, cut off all contact with her daughter. She informed me that Anthony has even been removed from her will, and they've added me instead. It's almost comical to see how karma is slowly but surely catching up to Anthony. I've also heard from the grapevine that Tyler doesn't want to marry Anthony and wants nothing to do with the child. Just like I always knew. Ashley is furious with Tyler since she's already lost 2 grandchildren, James and Na, because of him, but he remains adamant in his decision. As for me, I'm doing much better since my divorce. I'm focused solely on my children for now and don't want to keep dwelling on the past. I won't say this journey has been easy, but I don't regret anything I've done. I'm glad I loved Tyler and married him because otherwise I wouldn't have these 2 beautiful children. I am also glad he cheated on me because this was the final push I needed to break away from him. Otherwise, I might have still been stuck in that loveless marriage. I guess everything happens for a reason, and I believe in God's plan,